Actually, individuals together can create amazing change. During the era of the Cold War, it seemed that that was just what it was. There was a one-party state, there was a Berlin Wall, there were two big blocks, and it was never going to change. People were saying, okay, we'll boycott the TV news between 7:30 and 8. So they would pick up their TV, they'd walk downstairs with it, they'd put it like in a wheelbarrow or a children's stroller or whatever, and would walk around the central square with the TV on their shoulders in the wheelbarrow. Those stories, which seemed just to be kind of cute little stories, first, they were pretty dangerous to do, but second, there was a kind of dotted line, a very gentle dotted line that linked those things and the collapse of communism itself. But very often people who've taken that step, the political bungee jump, if you like, they've stepped off the precipice, they often feel incredibly energized by that very scary moment. He was on the ground and he said, as I lay there on the ground being beaten, I felt free for the first time. Many of these actions are extremely dangerous to take, extremely dangerous. You don't know if you're going to win. It's not like if I do it, I will win. It's perfectly possible you may die and still nothing substantial will have changed. It's been decades of not seeing change, but the protests that happened and all the different ones, the biggest one in recent years in 2007, but been many, many before that, eventually create the change. Often those were tiny little actions that people were taking. It was simply the fact that you were going to go on sitting at this lunch counter. And when you got arrested, somebody else would come along and sit at the lunch counter. And when they got arrested, somebody else would come. And I'm sure that everyone watching this will have seen the unbelievably emblematic picture of the woman a couple of months ago standing and kind of allowing herself to be arrested, picked up by these massive, great, well-armed police. And she is there looking very fragile, but actually her fragility was a kind of strength, really. The Australian runner who pulled out, Aboriginal herself, and then pulled out the Aboriginal flag as she ran around the track during her victory lap. Now that was forbidden and she was told, please don't do that again. And she did do it again 3 days later and she was rebuked for having done it. But then she continued to win and actually she was acknowledged as, of course she had the right to do that. And she became a kind of leader of herself. People are quite rightly I think, offended by the fact that in Saudi Arabia, there are very, very strict rules about what women must wear, even if they do not wish to. But interestingly, even some years ago in Turkey, you had the opposite, that people could get into trouble because they were wearing a headscarf and were told not to, because we are a secular country. Well, yeah, that's fine to be a secular country, but if someone chooses to wear a headscarf, why should they not do so? And in France, of course, that's come up recently, what's described as the burkini. I, speaking personally, but certainly human rights organizations, would feel very uncomfortable about both of those elements. On the one hand, deeply uncomfortable that Saudi women are forced to dress in a certain way, even if they would prefer not to. And many practicing Muslims would prefer not to. And equally, if a government which prides itself on being so secular is also forbidding people to make the choices that they have made. So I do think that rights are absolutely universal and they're about choices. There was definitely a strong xenophobic undertone. Now, the leaders may not themselves have been xenophobes, but what we have seen since the successful Brexit vote is a massive increase in xenophobic attacks. The politicians themselves, of course, were not encouraging those killings, but I do think the sense of permissiveness that you give by changing the dialogue and by fostering mistrust and hatred, that can help create a place where really dangerous things happen. And Syria is the obvious word that comes to mind in terms of the millions who've been forced out, the hundreds of thousands who have died, and the failure to react to that in good time, I think, is truly shocking. All of the richest countries in the world have done absolutely nothing by comparison with the much, much poorer countries who are taking an incredible burden of carrying these refugees. I think it's pretty hard to find examples where the armed struggle has not then become toxic in a range of different. In South Africa, the African National Congress, the ANC, it had tiny elements of violence. At one point, part of its strategy. But actually where it made most progress was where it went down the completely non-violent route. And certainly going back to one that we mentioned earlier, the civil rights movement in the States, there were many there who argued, no, we need violence because, this is so bad that only violence can end the violence, if you like, the racist violence. But actually that unbelievably powerful and very dangerous. I mean, being a non-violent resistor, that's not the soft option. It's an absolutely incredibly tough option. And in the end, that non-violence actually was what won that particular battle. And I think that's true in many, many different contexts.